Hi, welcome to Mark's Headroom. This is the 4th edition. Channel is an experiment. I have many outlets for my writing, my videos, and some of my creations, you could say. And one of them is FutureWise Energy, where I work from my oil and gas experience. Another is Transcendent, where I work with my experience in personal development, spirituality, psychology, complex PTSD, etc. It's kind of the mystical side. And then I have some entertainment channels. I'm a student of acting, and I've made a few films, produced and directed and written. And so this is an experimental channel. And what I've found myself talking about freely, because this is totally unscripted, and looking back on my last 3 episodes, I've talked about a lot of my personal history and some philosophy and psychology, some mystical work, as well as some lessons that I've learned in life. And I'm here to try to continue sharing and have an interaction with whatever audience might be attracted to this. And just so you know, I'm not very conformed in my creative or anything about my life. I'm very respectful, operate from my heart, my values, and find that they're usually acknowledged and appreciated in the communities that I've found myself in and the relationships that I've been in. And sometimes they kind of run into expectations that are formed by society and kind of externally that may not necessarily connect well with some of my longer term interest, which is basically to continue to live my life freely and openly with respect to the values that I have. So, for example, I've been in a long-term relationship with someone that was had very hardened expectations about how things would go, and after a certain period of time, I just they just left and locked me out and basically stopped talking to you. And, when I was growing up, that was something that was very childish. I think today it's something that's more and more common, of people being, what's the term? It's escaping me right now. But basically, where you are ghosted is the term that's used today, where someone basically just breaks off all forms of communication, provides no explanation or exit from a a relationship. And so that's hard to recover from. That can really mess with you. But anyway, I've done that, and had success in business and athletics, and I consider a success in my personal life as well. But I really have a very untraditional, non-conformed approach toward everything. And I've always been encouraged by most of the people that I've encountered to try to conform and fit in. On the other hand, I've had some people that I've worked with and interviewed over time that have reminded me of stories like of Abraham, who, was basically following a calling and executed that calling, and maybe didn't get what he was looking for, at least in terms of the story that was written. It looked like he never got what he wanted, but who am I to say, or who is anyone really to say, except for Abraham, whether he found what he was really looking for? And that kind of leads me into one of my kind of pet peeves about the narratives that we make for others, and well, it seems like it's rather pervasive in diagnosing and judging to some degree, or making judgments, not necessarily good or bad, or or making moral judgments, but just identifying things based on a little bit of information, and basically having a trial in our minds or in our hearts about someone without really um, giving them full, maybe devoting all of our empathy to understanding who they are and where they may be coming from. So anyway, I'm rambling again, which I do, and I've done this much of my life because I'm kind of a non-conformed artistic animal that is really still looking for his groove and his tribe. And, I consider, myself lucky if I look around and there's 15 to 20 people around me that I can connect with, because it seems like the common pattern that I've observed, and even seen some mystics that have created systems for individuals and for peoples and groups to come together and connect. That their community may begin with 5 and then kind of ramp up to 15 to 20 individuals that all may have different um, spiritual gifts or talents or ways of looking at things that tend to kind of fill out and make a group feel whole and effective. So I feel lucky when I find that, and I've found that around me, more than once in my life. And I think reflecting back as I'm rambling into this, one of the first times was when I played basketball. I think that was less than 15 people on this team, but nonetheless, there was a group, maybe coaches and a few assistant coaches or parents that were around, that made it feel like a complete um, organization and experience where you could communicate and um, express yourself, on the floor physically, as well as, it was a lot of communication involved in connecting with those other people. And it seemed like everyone had a common um, purpose, which seems rare these days. And I think it's something that we're really starved to find, is that common purpose. And, I think, at one point in the past, like church or, some community organizations, um, more recently, maybe psychology and business and work, tended to create the purpose in people's lives, or at least some commonality, between people. But that sense of community, that I can go back to, that I first felt and was very comfortable, got into flow state and found myself feeling free, was around basketball, which is a physical and a mental connection, because the two require execution of some patterns that are and expectations, across a team. So, with that said, I'm not going to reintroduce myself in detail here every episode, but I do need to mention that I've been fasting for 5 days, and in about an hour, I'll end up breaking this fast, and I've been doing this for about 4 years, maybe starting to get into 5 years. I'll have to go back and look at my notes. But I've been doing the 5-day fast and eating in a 53-hour eating window between Friday late afternoon and Sunday evening, and where I'll eat during that time to recharge my body. I also do intense workouts 7 days a week, and it adds up to 10 hours or so a week that I do the workouts. A lot of people, and I'm very careful during the week. I take some supplements, like not for calories, but to maintain my health. like I've learned that there's some minerals and so forth that I have to keep my body, maybe a little bit of sodium, potassium, to maintain my electrolytes, my body functions effectively, and I end up feeling great through the week, and it's kind of a shock to my system to start doing the digestion on the weekends. But that's just the path that I've been playing with recently. I've done fasting, going back into my teens, and I've experimented with longer fast as well as shorter term fast. And having the athletic background, um, probably helps. I seem to have an interesting physical reaction to various foods. So I'm pretty sensitive, and I've learned a lot about my body and my digestive system, and as well as what foods to work with and which ones to avoid, at least in this, particularly in this um, patterned way of and lifestyle of eating and sustaining myself here on Earth, so to speak. So I find a lot of insights coming to me during the week, during this 5-day fast period, and it's very insightful to see how society operates from the viewpoint of you might call me a mystic, but I'm a longtime observer of my fellow man and how things work in the world. I think my mother told me years ago that when I was a kid, I used to, her example was I was getting up early in the morning before the air conditioner came on to run outside and watch it come on to figure out how things work. So that investigator runs pretty strong in my the way that I'm built, in my essence. And at one point, there was a pretty good martyr here, and I was really kind of looking for some people to knock me down, and so I could get back up. And I've kind of gotten over that, and I'm in the process, really, of redefining what that's about. I don't think you totally get out from under something like that in one lifetime, but that pattern is something that's pretty strong with me about recovering. I've drowned to death and still here. I've also been struck by lightning, and I'm still here and thinking relatively similar to where I was before then. But those two periods did give me a blackout and kind of felt like a reset that may be very informative. And I'm going to talk about some of that a little bit later here today. But I find myself wanting to really talk today about the importance of self-development as a process, and not like a lightning strike or a drowning or a traumatic event that reshapes your life. Because a lot of us are working from a position of, maybe, wishful or watchful. Maybe you're aspirational, and or maybe there's some values that you find yourself wrestling with and looking to place. It seems like there's a lot of lost people, especially now that all of our churches have kind of fallen apart. I say all, but there's a lot of dissension. And now that we have this social connection and everything's transparent, we're really wrestling for what to trust and what to beware of. So my solution is yourself. And to trust yourself requires a different view than most of us are raised with. And so part of that process of learning to trust yourself, and this may be a lifelong process, it can happen faster for some people maybe than others, depending upon what kind of conditions that you've been exposed to in your early childhood, as well as what type of organism that you're working with. I mean, what kind of body you have, as well as how that mind body is operating in whatever bubble around the world that you've found yourself working in. So, but this emphasis on process, and also I'm going to talk about state, the importance of state, and state being not necessarily a mood or a particular emotion, and it's really a vibe that I'm talking about here, that I think is important to try to learn to recognize in yourself and in others, to find out what kind of state they're in. And this goes back to some Meisner acting training that is really, it mirrors some work that if you're a human design or an expert, or an astrology student, or a psychology, neuroscience, also, what are some other? Well, if you're an athlete, you can tell the mood and the intensity and the focus of people. Or maybe you're an actor or an actress that has been trained to pick up on these things. A lot of these mystics over the years have really worked long and hard to divest themselves of all the pre-existing biases and prejudices, to really feel what people are bringing into the scene or into the room, so to speak. And to be able to read that accurately and understand where these people are coming from is, well, it can be a lot. It can be overwhelming. And it can be something that's very confusing at some point in time. But ultimately, I'd like to think that you can develop some confidence. I know that I have, in dealing with those things without necessarily putting those things into some corner, or filing them away, maybe incorrectly, because a lot of times those things are very important to pick up on, to connect with at a deeper level with other people. So that's a process. That's not something that you just smoke ayahuasca or snap your fingers or get struck by lightning. In most cases, I mean, I'm all about being wrong about these things, because I'd love to find a way that it just happens by the grace of God. That'd be great. And there are some people that are just naturally gifted with those talents, and they haven't been overly conditioned by the world to suppress those, and they can bear their gifts rather quickly with other people. So I'm not necessarily saying this is something that takes forever. It could take a long time, and depends on who you are and where you've been. But to go back to the ideas of state and process are real important, because you've got to lean on something to get away from some of the conditioning that is out there, and working from the state that you're in and that other people are in, or something that's not commonly taught by institutions, education, or family, or church. And there are a lot more shoulds and roles that are expected to be brought into the room, whereas it's very rare to run into someone that just walks into the room and they're open and reacting from a human level. So make a mental note about process and state, because I think, and you may have to remind me about it, because those are really powerful ways to live, and consider that your life is really a journey and a process. And the more hardened you are, the more identified you are, then the more maybe stuck, frustrated. I mean, but don't get me wrong. I mean, that may be a haven for you for a period of time, or even a lifetime. Who am I to say? But we have so many rushes for outcomes these days. We don't want to be in pain for long. We don't want to not have an answer or an explanation. Or like I was speaking to someone earlier today, and they were asking about someone that they hadn't seen in a long time. And they basically were asking, is this person being of value to others or not today? Is this other person worth something, or are they being worthless? That was their state of inquiry. And of course, at one level, they were concerned for this person and care about them. But on the other hand, they were wanting to know in their own mind to satisfy their own, this kind of maybe some conditioning that they had to put someone into a category of being worthy or worthless. And that was very painful for me to encounter this person who was being so judgmental. I still have those people in my life. I mean, I try, but to be non-judgmental myself, but I still find myself, with people that are far from maybe some of the standards that I try to hold for myself inside, which makes me vulnerable. And sometimes it really hurts because I really try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes either knowingly or unknowingly, sometimes I get taken advantage of and ghosted. But those were maybe my expectations that, and some failures on my part that led up to that. That's another issue. But rushing to outcomes is something that doesn't necessarily serve the process. If you're listening this far into Mark's Headroom, you've got to be something about some alternative, non-conforming processes that you might like to employ or deploy in your life to explore, overcome, find yourself. You tell me. But this rush to outcomes and this seeing everything as a narrative and everything as cause and effect can be a very shallow way to operate. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's important to recognize all of those things and be aware of those. But it's one thing to observe them and identify and watch, and it's another thing to be identified and in that game and really making those judgments at a almost like you're operating from your soul, or maybe it's a mindless thing that happens to some people where someone's either good or bad or useful or not useful to them, and they simply put them in those categories and operate mechanically like that. Well, I'm trying to steer others as best I can toward examining how to offload some of the mechanics of their life so they can continue to survive like I do, but also try to build a platform where they can develop their extra senses that have been neglected over the years by mankind. So that takes a lot of trust. And for that to happen, there needs to be some competence and some effectiveness in this area of life. So, trust, competence, effectiveness, that all involves some communication and this idea of trust. I mean, when are you being manipulated or exploited? When are you in danger versus when are you feeling safe? Well, those are lifelong issues that if you're rushing to judgment about feeling scared and running from fear, well, that really kind of extends the process. Some of us have been traumatized and run into things that we seem to have no control over consciously that moved us forward in that, really quickly. And that's known as trauma. And that shock can, it puts some people down and they never recover from it. They get so hardened that they get stuck in survival patterns that they will, throughout this lifetime, never escape. And then some of us do have a chance to heal maybe a little bit, enough to find the little breadcrumbs as to how to get out of that prison that we may have been in. So, and then some of us we're trusted institutions that, or neighbors or friends or family, and had people that we were intimately involved with that betray some expectations that we had, or how we were framing the relationship. And then some of us have what psychologists call attachment issues. And I think I even heard an NPR talk about that today. And I think, that's a very good material to examine and try to understand. I think, again, it's a very, can be a very long process to get to the bottom of some of these things, and get out of the blame and causality game, and, into this place, this space where you can really feel your own feelings, and deal with some emptiness and boredom, and try to, build something that maybe relationships, or maybe it's a hobby or a profession that is satisfying. But you'll find along the way that there's a lot of well-meaning people that get misunderstood, and you may feel misunderstood. I know I have. And one of my lifelong investigations has been about the sincerity of other people, and whether they were deliberate in some of the activities or actions that they were taking, or whether they just were operating from a deliberate effort to manipulate or take advantage of or neglect. So it would involve looking into someone else's heart, and that's something that I don't think that I'm really capable of. So that was something I found myself trying to distance myself from. On one hand, it led me into dark alleys where I ended up getting, betrayed and hurt. On another hand, it gave me insight on myself, that I'm pretty strong and resilient, and I'm still here. And I want to talk about it. I wanted to share something about some of my experiences with other people that might benefit them. Part of it is a need to connect and speak about things that were really taboo and not spoken of throughout the history of mankind. So today, I think there's a transparency, and obviously with this medium, although I can be very critical of the media and stories and narratives misleading and putting people to sleep, at the same time, I feel like there's a process that I'm involved in here as a mystic, or as a healer, or as someone that just cares about his fellow man, that needs to share some information from my life that's really unusual and doesn't really fit the common mediums of expression. And so I'm putting it out here, and I think this medium is something that will, it'll be preserved. It'll be a resource that's available for other people, whether it's used today or 10 years from now. Who am I to say? And so anyway, I wanted to talk about this seeming lack of empathy where we really don't understand each other. And that's a real key to examine in yourself and ask yourself, am I really understanding the maybe the category that I put this person in? Or maybe you never even really thought about how you categorize people and the biases, and maybe you're being hard on someone and you're projecting a lot of internal stuff on them that if you take time, you may have to come back and look at yourself and see that there's external events that are really pointing you to look inside and deal with your own self-betrayal, your own anger and rage, not against other people, but maybe more importantly, about the things that you've suppressed and not acted out on or not had a chance to experience in your own life. Well, that's a process, and that involves various states that may be where you may have blocks and obstacles to transcend, to get past, to get free. So this empathy is so critical to the evolution of mankind, and to move beyond some of the binary patterns that we see ourselves in today, just as strong as ever. So my investigation around this sincerity, has led me to examine my heart and examine fears, and also how I operate from my head sometimes, and how we can use that to distance ourselves from other people and try to feel safe. And again, that's a process of examining these states in yourself as you live your life and are in the just the living of the being of your life, the circumstances as they unfold, the people that walk into your scenes of life, people that walk out, what you notice, what you don't notice, where your focus is, what you want or don't even know that you want from them, and how they're interacting with you can be, obviously, there's a million things that can happen all at once in the same room. And it's funny, I've watched this time and time again where people seem to be operating or trying to operate from the same set of rules, be it a Dale Carnegie system of sales, or and things happen totally different for people. And there's a number of reasons I think that is, but I think one of the strongest is that our bodies and heads may have different objectives and operate differently than we may have been trained. We think that we can just make up a set of rules and things will operate a certain way, and we're operating from our head. Whereas some people, best I can tell, it's the body and the way that they carry themselves, their vibe, maybe their state, is one that creates this scene that they walk into a room and certain things happen. The other person walks in with that same mindset and entirely different things happen. So that's exciting to me to see the differences between those two. And then it's interesting to see those two people comparing notes as to why things went differently and how they might rationalize that using the language and information, maybe scarce information that they have about what actually happened. Neuroscience says that we only know about 5% of what's going on around us. And I think they're also learning that we only sample a little bit and we fill in a lot of blanks. And that's another, maybe that'll be something I speak about in the future, but that's fascinating to me. So one of one of the investigations I did was this family system, and we'll just call the family system K. And I'm going to talk about women here because I tracked this system through the women, and for maybe 4 generations, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I find this totally fascinating because, and I do consider women to be closer to the earth and to um, and to a truth and a strength that men are not. I think men are detached, and they're often trying to connect with those things, and they're so driven by sex and money and dominance, at least in our bubbles here in this phase of mankind. Whereas women, have been kind of neglected or pushed out of the power roles that I think they naturally have, because obviously everyone that's here on the planet came from a woman. And at least as far as we can see, obviously they had to be impregnated by a man, or with the science today, from something that originated from the male side. But for me, the garden, or the source of every life on the planet, coming from a female, is a sign that must be a very dominant and gifted, and obviously attractive, with the way that we're set up with the sexual dynamics, um, a very powerful side of humanity. And it's interesting to see how a lot of systems deal or don't deal with the sexuality, whether you're male or female, because that's a very strong determinant as to how you've been conditioned. So let's just call this family K, and K goes back maybe to the early 1900s, where you've got K. Let's just call the first K is 90 years old today. So K90 is a young girl, beautiful, in South Texas, and she lives on a ranch, and she's trying to do the right thing. She has feelings for somebody in her teens, and they get together, and since they start fooling around, a lot of times there's this morality that they have to get married. Of course, they have a kid and get married. I'm not sure which order that really went in, but she was a very beautiful woman, and the the male that she was involved with, was kind of a lost soul. So they had this child, a boy, together, and Kay got to looking around and realized there was probably some bigger fish in the world that could probably help her have a better life. And so she left her husband and abandoned that boy for an upgrade in her life. And she moves to Connecticut and has this fancy life, and has 3 children of her own, and a boy, a girl, and then another boy. And she ends up, at some later point in time, watching both of those boys die tragically. Now, interesting thing is that I heard about that totally independent. I didn't know these people at this point in time, but I heard the story about those 2 tragic losses in K90's life. And later I came to know her granddaughter in my life. We'll call her K40. And so that was an interesting intersection in our lives. It became a rich foundation for connection and understanding later. But that was a tragedy. And there was also some great wealth that was acquired through that family system that she uh, left. And well, the family system that she got involved in after she left her first husband and first child. So she had three more kids, and her first child ended up becoming an alcoholic and never recovered from whatever he encountered in his early life. And he had a hard life in Texas. So K90's two boys die tragically, destroyed K90, broke her heart. And one of them in particular was very good with money. And since the family had this large fortune, lives large enough that most of the family didn't even really know how to operate in life. They just lived off in a bubble. And I think most of the family ended up being and living in Texas. So they had so much that they didn't even really do anything other than spend. But there was a very responsible and aware son that had managed the fortune quite well. He'd also married and to a very materialistic person, not too far from K90. And so whenever he died as a result of one of these tragedies, she took most everything from K90. And so K90 was left with one surviving daughter who had never done anything except play around and try to fight her mental disorders in therapy, and then run out in the world and was having a lot of difficulties in her life. And so those, K90 was left with, let's call the other one K60. K60 had been through about 3 marriages and spent a fortune and never really gotten herself, squared up. But, K60 also had 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And whenever this incident happened and destroyed K90, K90 went and pulled K60 in, and pulled her out of a marriage that she was in with the 3 kids that she had, sent the 2 boys to live with K60's husband, who was being ostracized from the family. And so K60 is forced into a situation where she's really being dominated by K90 and is not having access to as much money as she once had. So she goes and finds someone to provide. She finds a doctor in Texas and provides some stability, for her and lifestyle. And she invests in that for a period of time and is kind of a fledgling mother to the 3 kids that she has, the 2 boys that she gave up custody to, and then the one daughter, call her K40, that she was raising alongside K90. So K40 and K90 are mothering, K60 and K90 are mothering K40, and K40 is just a total mess, but she does have some intelligence, and I think her intentions were, very sincere to try to get her act together and take responsibility for her life. And so, um, interestingly, um, K40 ends up, being kind of a surrogate mother to K60. And I think you've probably seen this if you've watched mother-daughter relationships where there can be some role reversal that takes place. And K 40 ended up getting married to someone, and K60 ended up divorcing her husband and marrying the father of K40's new husband. Very, very odd to me. But you can see with all of the lostness in this family story and the desperation and the materialism that was there, the decisions that were made were just totally, based on, well, we don't really know. But you can see how these patterns in this family really led to so much disarray. And then to watch K40 have three young girls, call them like K8, 10, and 12, and to see them start to repeat these patterns of betrayal and you could almost, well, you could clearly see how there was a total lack of trust in their system, in their body, in their, it's like there was a great amount of intelligence, but there was also just a total suppression of all their feelings. And so K8, 10, and 12 had no sense of safety or they just lacked connection to their heart. And it was very painful to be around them. And K40 really suffered with that and felt so responsible for it and so helpless about it. So, I watched K40 do the exact same things that her grandmother, her mother, had done in terms of just being cold and heartless and overly materialistic. And the only thing they really trusted was this pattern that they were repeating. And yes, they'd go to church and they would sing songs and say all the right things and give their 5 or 10% and be part of the kind of a conformed moralistic movement that looked and felt like it was something that could be trusted. Yet when the patterns really, really exposed themselves for what they were, you can see this desperation and lack of heartlessness, heart-led or soul-led living, in the absence of any sincerity in their lives. And so I've seen a number of family systems, fall apart eventually as all of this has been exposed. So this is a terrible study. I mean, who would write? I mean, people have told me there's information in here that I could use to write a movie, but I mean, I'm sharing this story now, talk about process, because those things, many of you probably have encountered similar circumstances, and you may have only seen a glimpse, but you've never really had a chance to see the entire family history. And if you do, you may just label it as evil. And I'm not doing that. I'm talking about patterns that are being repeated here, and the absence of people being in touch with themselves and being able to make decisions with a voice that they really are in touch with and trust. And I've spent a long time with myself trying to find that myself, because I know as I've journaled and that I've dealt with some very difficult circumstances from my early childhood, that to get clear and comfortable and surrender to those feelings, to allow yourself to be in the abyss and feel those feelings is uncommon. And in many respects, even though you may be working with a counselor or a therapist or psychologist or a minister, it's so rare to find someone that's just comfortable being there with you in that space and holding your hand and maybe telling you the truth is that this may hurt a little longer. This may not go away overnight, but it could. So I'll go back to those a lot of times those family traditions or family um, patterns. A lot of the problems that we have are because of the secrets and because these things are people are ashamed of what they've done. They're ashamed of it. Looking back, they may have some distance and realize that they shouldn't have done this. And it's not about going back to the person that maybe got the short end of the stick and saying sorry, or but it's more about examining yourself and what you've suppressed, what you've betrayed, and it's a process, and it's a process that is. It's just. It seems like the human experience is one of dealing with various states that are obstacles, and are sometimes where the gate opens and you find yourself free, and sometimes it's closed and you just can't move past it. And it's by the grace of God that for me, from my perspective, when that gate does come open and you have a chance to go to the other side, forgive, surrender. And if there's something that you still need to fight with, maybe you'll still have the strength and the angle or the perspective to use some of the willpower that you have to deal with situations and not be someone that's just getting run over, because it's important to find strength on the other side of these issues. But sometimes in this process there is a powerful step in surrender, and realizing that surrender is not necessarily forgetting. Surrender is not even really necessarily forgiving. Forgiveness may actually be a state that you find or stumble into that is supported organically in ways that we don't even understand. So anyway, I find that secrets, and a lot of this has to do with women being very strong and having very, very um, very direct access to power through their beauty and attractiveness and their access to some power in the world, but yet having to deal with the dissonance of being pushed down and shut up and treated like a second class, sold as you know as slaves, sex slaves, or treated like second class citizens that don't even have the right to vote. And for them to have the chance finally to own their power is more than maybe it can happen in one generation. I mean, one of my things I've found myself talking about more times than not is about how long it took women to own their power. They were given the right to vote here in the United States 100 years ago, or over 100 years ago. Yet society held them back from really owning all of that power. And even today, you find there's a very strong male dominance, um, at least active here in the United States, really trying to suppress that power in women. And or from them having the chance just to operate freely the way that men do. And so I think that there's a part of that is inhibition on a whole everything that would dictate how a person operates in life as to how freely they operate. I mean, you can say the same thing is true for some men, but there's since I was talking about the power that women have, and then the suppression that they've dealt with for years, for I'm talking about centuries, if not thousands of years. Um, it's mind blowing. And as someone that's raised three, um, 5 girls and 3 boys, um, it's a powerful thing to consider because I care about every one of those 8 kids that I've had a chance to raise, and I can tell you the that suppression of feelings hurts boys and girls. But given the context of many of the circumstances that people find themselves in today, I think it's still a bigger issue for women than it is for men. So that's the story of Family K. I'll tell you just briefly about how this can operate in a man. I know a very successfully financially man, let's call him Jay, and but Jay very quickly showed me some insights into some psychological damage that he had encountered as a kid, I think by a dominant sister who put him down and made him feel like he was impotent. And he's never escaped that. That's like a hardened part of his psyche, and everything that he does, it's almost like he's looking for a female to acknowledge and revere him for. And everywhere he turns, he fails. And he's trapped. And he's been on a religious kick and trying to find power through kind of a dominant male. If the scriptures say this about men, the scriptures are 2,000 years old and are using roles that were necessary to survive 2,000 years ago and that are not necessary today. But nonetheless, the rules are those rules are dominant for men that they try to impress on women. And of course, there's women that are looking for a dominant male, and that materialism that I described by Family K, they were all about finding that dominant male that operated that way. But anyway, this guy is hung up in trying to use religious texts to tell people that he's the king. And it was funny, one day he looked over, there was somebody wearing a Kurt Cobain T-shirt, and he was he was laughing at them, making fun of them, because what he was projecting on them was, he basically said they're celebrating, or their celebrity, or the person they worship is someone that killed himself. And I thought, how ironic, because this guy is getting power from texts that have been written about the life of Jesus. And Jesus was basically someone that came here knowing that he would be taken out, and almost like, it's almost like dying by cop, knowing that if you raise your arm up and it looks like you've got a gun in your hand, that everybody's going to shoot you. Well, I mean, Jesus came here knowing knowing the outcome that he was going to have. So anyway, I thought that was kind of ironic that that person, this man, called him Jay, would take that view and find, comic, uh, or be comedic about this person that he was projecting so much of his own psyche, many of his own issues upon, that But that kind of irony is something to watch in yourself, because we all find ourselves doing this. I've watched this. It's a process again. And when you find yourself experiencing something like this, making fun of another person is a real great insight, clue as to how to go deeper into your own stuff to get into that place. But one of the things that's really difficult today is to find support. Once you get past that, how do you connect with others in that place of after you've worked through that maybe that obstacle, that barrier? How do you forgive yourself? And how do you emerge from that? Because ultimately, we don't have that many examples or role models around us, or people that we know that we could trust to support us in this place of not knowing where we're going to go next. When you do carve away some of those obstacles and barriers, that's a very sensitive place. And when someone is very quick to judge or tell you what's wrong with the world, or is projecting, and you can read their vibe and you can see how uncomfortable. I mean, once you get into this place, you can make some other people so uncomfortable that it triggers their reactions to everything that they haven't dealt with in their life. So you can find yourself very isolated, and that's a scary place. And I think that may be one of the reasons that there hasn't been more evolution of this awakening to the suppression and allowing yourself to be in this void for an extended period of time to be able to work your way out of it and to really find out what's important to you and how you want to operate, and find some comfort and confidence in operating from that void. And if you're this far into the video, you must be on my wavelength, because I'm not trying to entertain, and I know I ramble and I can be difficult to follow from time to time. This may be something you have to come back to, but this is an important place to note in your process, this state of feeling like you're in the abyss. Because I can remember some doing some breath work myself, where I encountered this space, and it was very scary. Physically, I couldn't hold it for too long, and mentally, psychically, I would get to a point where I would just pass out. And it took a lot, some real time and some EMDR to find my way back into that space, and to learn to kind of hold myself in that abyss, and just to be and breathe and get past that. And then the conditioning comes back in. I found myself looking for an identity, looking for that quick answer. Okay, well, I did that, so now I should have this. And every time I say should to myself, I'm like, okay, not as far along as I thought I was. Those shoulds are often, not often, almost always a sign of conditioning coming into your psyche, or into your presence somehow, and posing an obstacle to finding that true place to reconnect with and to work from in this lifetime here. So I find that groups and institutions are sometimes helpful in that, but sometimes they're full of so much judgment, and they end up projecting things that they can be a cult can be an easy place for someone to land that gets in this vulnerable place in the abyss. And even to find another individual, that could help you hold your hand in that place. and let you retain or build up your own agency, build up your own individual viewpoint, for your own outcome. Not that you have to agree with this other person, and allowing you the space to explore and to create path, your own path organically out of this abyss is so powerful. So you can easily get reconditioned in that abyss, that vulnerability. And, I mean, who am I to say? But I think it's important to note your process. And I recently witnessed someone that woke up after 20 years of committing to a certain system and very politely and with some good values that I respect, addressing the crowd that was around him and saying, I've got to go. I've got to do this my way. And I find myself using the group and a lot of this conditioning around this system, something that's getting in my way. So I go back often to the strength of an individual, and ultimately, as you work your way through the life, you'll go back to that time and time and time again. Hopefully, you'll have enough people around you that are open and loving and touch enough with their own heart that they'll give you the space that you need to find that out and not feel threatened by your the changes that you may feel like you have to make the most of this experience that you're having. So a lot of this involves reframing this abyss as something that is a safe place to be rather than a place that's lost or not tolerated. And then I think there's also the states that you have to recognize in yourself where you realize that you're acting out, and maybe part of the way that we're built as human beings is that we may experience survival patterns early in life that certain things may trigger, certain patterns may be recognized, and they trigger a certain state, and suddenly that state comes back. And when you find yourself in that state of acting out as if there was a danger present that may not actually be in the room right now, wow, that's almost like, a stumble or a master at work that, if you use it right, is going to help you get closer and closer to what's really in your heart. And that, and when you learn to operate from that place, that's when you're really able to be a gift, not only to yourself and really build up some self-respect and self-love. And, but that's when you can really give. So that's a beautiful place for me to kind of wrap things up here. But I do believe that there are other people on this path that understand what I'm speaking to here. And ultimately I'm really reaching out, looking for an uncommon group of connections through this social media, whatever this media platform distribution is, because I end up sharing Mark's Headroom in a number of different places, kind of spreading it around the world, so to speak. But here I am, and I'll be back next week. That's my intention. And I hope that you got something out of this. Mark's Headroom, signing off. All the best.